remove the wheel. We're going to take this cap off first. Just use a straight blade screwdriver. Pop that off. Use a 19mm socket. Take the lug nuts off. Take the wheel off. I'm going to take the axle nut off. Use a 36mm socket. And you might want to just tap this with a hammer. Use a punch so that you don't ruin the threads, but just make sure this is loose, which it is. There's a retainer right here on this bracket. We want to take that off. Just use some needle nose pliers and just squeeze that, slide that off. Pop this clip off right here. I'm just going to use a pocket screwdriver. Just slide that out. There's another retainer over here. You can either pop the retainer off or use a trim tool and just pop it out. So I'll just open it up, take that out. There's another retainer right here. I'll just pop that open, slide that out. Just gonna take a trim tool and just slide the connector out. Make it a little easier to disconnect. And slide that off. I'll just move this out of the way. We're just trying to get some slack so that we don't ruin the hose. Ruin the cable. There's 2 bolts right here and here. Use a 10mm socket. Take those bolts out. Slide that off. That just gives you some more slack with the brake hose. Now we're going to take this nut off for the tie rod end. Use a pick if you need to take the cotter pin out, or just break it off. Now use a 21mm socket, take the nut off. We need to separate the tie rod from the knuckle. You can use a pickle fork in there and separate it that way. The downfall of that is you may rip the boot. And there's other front end tools that you could use that will grab onto here and press this down. What I like to do is just take the nut, put the nut back on here just so the end of the stud doesn't mushroom out, and then take a hammer and give it a bunch of taps. Sometimes it pops out. If it doesn't pop out on the second or third hit, you probably want to try another one of those tools because you don't want to mess up the threads on the end of the tie rod. Now we can take this off. Slide that out. Now I'm going to take the caliper off with the bracket. So take these bracket bolts off, use an 18mm socket. Slide the bracket and the caliper off the rotor. Might have to use a pry bar. Just get underneath there. And use a brake caliper hanger and hang the caliper from the coil spring. And take the rotor off. Take a 24mm socket, take this nut off. I'm actually going to leave it on a couple threads because we got to separate the knuckle from the ball joint. And you can do this the same as the tie rod end. Use either a fork or some type of front end tool where you can press this out. Do the best you can. Sometimes you can just take a hammer and give it a tap right here. You don't want to hit it too hard because you don't want to break anything, but sometimes it will dislodge it. There we go. Not too bad. If you do that too many times, though, you want to use the tool instead. I'm going to use a 15mm socket and a 15mm wrench. Take this bolt out. Now I'm just going to take a pry bar and just go in between here, just spread this apart a little bit. as you do that, you can separate the upper control arm from the ball joint. Just be careful, this is going to tip forward once it's completely separated. Just like that. Just tap on this a little bit. And then I'm going to just support this knuckle while I take that nut off, and then set the whole knuckle aside. And slide it off. Underneath, take this cover off, use a 13mm socket, take these bolts out. Slide that down. Now from the back side, if you have a fork that you can separate the axle from the differential, you can try that, or just use a big punch. Get underneath here. You might want to put a drain bucket underneath. There may be some fluid that comes out. There we go, popped out. Took a little effort. And slide that out. I'll slide the axle in place. Line that up. Should be able to push it on. If you're struggling to get it on, just using a rubber mallet on the end of it. Just give it a few taps. Get it so it locks in. And that's good. Put this cover underneath. Get the bolts started. Tighten those down. Now we can put the knuckle on. Now you need to do a combination of the axle shaft and the lower ball joint, kind of at the same time. Just raise it up. And then just make sure you have the nut in your hand so you can get it started. And just to make everything easier, put the upper ball joint in, get that started. Might have to move this a little. Hold on. Tap it down, put this bolt through. Now tighten this down. And torque it to 30 foot-pounds. Put the tie rod in. Just move the knuckle so that it lines up. Put the castle nut on. And torque it to 44 foot-pounds. Make sure the hole lines up for the cotter pin. Slide a new cotter pin through and fold over the cotter pin. Trim the excess. If the ball joint keeps spinning, you can put a jack under here and just raise it up so that it puts a little bit of pressure on the ball joint. Try to tighten it this way. And then torque it to 81 foot-pounds. Lower the pull jack. Put the rotor on. I'm just going to put a lug nut on backwards to hold the rotor on. Put the spindle nut on. Now I'm going to take a pry bar, slide it in between the lug studs, and then torque the spindle nut to 103 foot-pounds. Now take the caliper off the caliper hanger, slide it over the rotor with the brake pads in there on the bracket. Put the caliper bolts in. Now torque these bolts to 110 foot-pounds. Now take the bolts, put these bolts in for this bracket. And take the front wheel speed sensor wire, reroute that in the right position, put this clip, it's going to go through that bracket right there. This one's going to go right here. Put this one right here. Lock it down. Little bracket on the back right for that one. For actually this one. And right here. Plug that in. And push it in. And you can take this lug nut off and install the wheel. Now I'm going to torque these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds in a cross pattern to tighten the wheel down evenly. Go around again, double check. Take the center cap, there's a key on the back that shows you where the valve stem goes. Line that up, lock it down, and you can do all the same on the other side.